What if the storms in your life were not obstacles, but invitations? A child once arrived at his grandfather's quiet home, nestled between fields and distant hills. The summer breeze carried the scent of earth and time. The boy's laughter filled the corners of the old house, where silence usually reigned. He was full of questions, like a cup constantly overflowing. One day, sitting under a fig tree, he asked, "Grandfather, how can I become someone great in life?" The old man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood, motioned gently, and led the boy toward a small nursery at the edge of the village. From the rows of tiny green saplings, he chose 2 identical plants, fragile but full of potential. He carried them back home with care, as if carrying quiet truths. At home, he planted 1 sapling in a clay pot, nestled inside the safety of the house. The other, he pressed into the soil just outside, exposed to wind, sun, and sky. The boy watched curiously. "Which one do you think will grow stronger?" the grandfather asked softly. The boy thought for a moment and said, The one inside. It will be safe from the heat and the storms." The old man only smiled, his silence more telling than 1,000 words. Sometimes we think protection means growth, but protection can also mean limitation, and the winds we avoid may be the ones meant to shape us. The boy didn't know it yet, but the lesson had already begun. The seasons came and went, weaving their stories through the air. The boy returned home with his parents as summer ended, leaving the 2 plants behind, one protected in the house, the other outside, under the shifting sky. Years passed, like turning pages in a quiet book. The boy grew. He tasted life in new cities, new schools, and among unfamiliar voices. Yet, every year, during summer, he would return to the same home, the same fig tree, and the same warm presence of his grandfather. 4 summers later, with a taller frame and deeper voice, the boy once again sat with his grandfather beneath the fig tree. The sun filtered through the leaves, painting gold across their skin. "Grandfather," he said, "years ago I asked how to be great. You never answered me." The old man's eyes twinkled. "I did," he said gently, "but come, let me show you the rest." Together they walked toward the house. Inside, the plant in the clay pot still stood, alive but small. Its roots had circled endlessly within the confines of the pot, stunted by safety. Then they stepped outside. There, in the same patch of earth, stood a towering tree. Its branches reached wide, its leaves whispering stories to the wind. The boy stood silent. "Tell me," the grandfather said, "which one truly grew?" The boy nodded, eyes wide. "To grow," said the old man, "you must first be willing to stand where storms may find you." And with that, the lesson deepened. The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the open windows of the old house. The boy stood silently beside his grandfather, still feeling the echo of the tree's quiet lesson deep in his heart. They had breakfast together in silence, the kind that speaks more than words, and then the grandfather gestured toward the fields beyond their home. "Come," he said gently, "I want to show you something else." They walked side by side until they reached the edge of the field, where a small path led through wild grass and scattered stones. The wind whispered between them like a storyteller. There, beneath a crooked tree, stood an old broken fence that had once guarded the garden long ago. The boy noticed it and asked, "Why didn't you fix it?" The grandfather replied, Some things, when broken, remind us of the storms we've already survived. The boy looked puzzled, so the old man knelt and placed his hand on the cracked wood. This fence was destroyed by the same storm that nearly pulled the roots of our strongest trees. But what remained was enough. He looked at his grandson with calm eyes and said, "We often believe success is in perfection, but true strength hides in what remains standing after life has passed through us like wind." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of those words settle in his chest. Some truths are not learned all at once. They are absorbed slowly, like morning light, warming the soul. That afternoon the sky shifted. Clouds gathered like silent monks preparing for ritual. The boy and his grandfather sat beneath the veranda, watching the wind stir the trees. Leaves danced in circles across the ground, and in the distance, thunder rolled like the deep breath of the earth. "Storms coming," the grandfather murmured, his gaze fixed on the far-off hills. The boy looked uneasy. Will it be strong? Strong enough to remind the trees who they are, the grandfather said with a faint smile. As the first drops of rain fell, the boy noticed how calmly his grandfather remained. He didn't rush to close the shutters or retreat to another room. Instead, he opened his arms slightly, palms facing upward, as if welcoming the sky's wild sermon. "Why aren't you afraid?" the boy asked. The grandfather replied, "Because I've learned not to fear what teaches me. Storms are messengers. They shake what needs shaking. They reveal what was hidden, and sometimes they remind us of the shelter within." The wind howled louder. Rain lashed against the earth in heavy rhythm. Yet, beneath the shelter of the roof, the boy felt something unexpected. Peace, a strange calm that came not from safety, but from understanding. In that moment, he realized storms didn't only test strength, they gave it. Trees rooted deeply did not resent the wind, they embraced it. They whispered to the sky, "I will not break." The grandfather placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Courage," he said, "is grown in weather like this." The storm raged through the night, but by morning the skies had softened. The world looked rinsed, as if nature had taken a long, deep breath and exhaled clarity. Dew clung to the leaves like tiny mirrors, and the earth smelled richer, wiser. The boy stepped outside, the wet soil sinking slightly beneath his bare feet, grounding him in this fresh beginning. He looked up at the old tree outside the house, the one that had grown through winds, droughts, and seasons of silence. Its branches stretched high, as if embracing the morning light, unshaken by the night's fury. And suddenly, he understood what his grandfather meant. That tree didn't grow strong in comfort. It grew strong because of resistance, because of every push it had endured. Later that day, the boy returned to his grandfather with a question blooming on his tongue. "Grandpa," he asked, "how do I know which storms in life will shape me and which ones will break me?" The grandfather folded a blanket slowly, as if folding time itself. "All storms shape you," he replied, "but none can break you unless you forget who you are." The boy sat with this truth, letting it settle deep into the soil of his heart. He began to see storms not as enemies, but as sculptors, chiseling away the unnecessary to reveal the essential form within. Growth, he realized, doesn't avoid storms. It listens to them. and then it roots deeper, holding on, quietly and stronger than before. Days passed, and the boy found himself drawn more and more to the tree outside. He began waking before sunrise, sitting beneath its shade, with his eyes half closed, listening, not with his ears, but with something deeper. Birds would flutter above, and the wind whispered through the leaves like an old monk reciting sacred verses. The world, he noticed, had its own language, one spoken in stillness. One morning he turned to his grandfather and said, "This tree, it teaches without speaking." The old man smiled, eyes reflecting a memory. "Yes," he said, softly, "because real wisdom rarely needs to raise its voice." The boy nodded. He began noticing things differently. When the wind blew hard, the tree didn't resist, it bent. When rain fell heavily, it drank. When lightning struck nearby, it stood, silent, unafraid. This, he thought, was the posture of strength, not in force but in flexibility, not in noise but in silent resilience. That evening, the grandfather placed 2 cups of tea between them. "You've been quiet," he said. "Tell me what your silence holds." The boy looked into the tea's gentle steam. "I think storms don't come to destroy us," he murmured, "but to awaken the strength we didn't know we had." The grandfather tapped the table gently. "Then perhaps," he whispered, "what we call difficulty is really an invitation." And so the boy began to understand. Some of life's loudest truths arrive in the most quiet, unsuspecting ways. The next morning, the boy rose with the sun, carrying a notebook his grandfather had given him long ago. He sat under the great tree and opened it, not to write, but to observe, ready to receive rather than to fill. The world around him felt different now, as if every sound, every shift in the wind was trying to tell him something sacred. He watched how the tree let go of a leaf without protest, releasing it to the breeze as if to say, "Everything has its time." He watched ants rebuild a path after it had been washed away by rain. He watched a caterpillar wrap itself in stillness, not knowing what it would become, only trusting the unknown as a necessary part of life. When his grandfather joined him, he asked, "Why do some people fear change, even when it's what helps them grow?" The old man sat beside him and said, "Because change asks us to surrender, and surrender feels like losing, until you realize it's how the soul learns to fly." The boy listened closely. "Then storms don't come to test us, they come to train us." His grandfather smiled. "Exactly. Storms don't ask if you're ready, they simply arrive. But when you've learned to stand in the rain, when you've embraced discomfort like an old teacher, you become something storms cannot break." The tree above them shivered slightly as a breeze passed through, like an ancient monk nodding in silent agreement with the truth they had just uncovered. That afternoon, the boy wandered alone through the winding paths of the village fields. The sky above was a quiet canvas of shifting clouds, soft and patient. With every step, he remembered his grandfather's words echoing in the rhythm of his breath. Surrender is not defeat. It is the beginning of transformation. He paused beside a small stream, its water flowing gently around stones and fallen leaves. It didn't resist. It didn't complain. It simply moved, adjusting its shape to everything in its way, soft yet unstoppable. In its flow, The boy saw a reflection of what it meant to grow with grace. Returning home, he found his grandfather trimming a bonsai tree. The old man didn't rush. Every cut was intentional, every movement made with care. "Why do you shape it so carefully?" the boy asked. "Because shaping something gently," his grandfather replied, "teaches patience, just like life shapes us through slow, deliberate change." The boy nodded. "So storms prune us too?" "Yes," the grandfather said, "but unlike this tree, we often resist the pruning. We fear the loss, not knowing that what is taken away is making space for what is becoming." They sat together in silence, the sound of the shears and distant birds the only music between them. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting golden shadows across the earth, the boy whispered, "Then I will no longer fear the storms." His grandfather looked at him, heart full, and said, "That is the beginning of real strength." That night, the wind picked up. It whispered through the wooden slats of the house, rattled the shutters, and danced across the roof like a wandering spirit. The boy lay awake, eyes open, listening. But over the first time, the sound didn't stir fear. It stirred awareness. In the dark, he rose from bed and stepped outside. The moon, veiled behind moving clouds, cast a soft light over the garden. The trees swayed, the leaves rustled like ancient mantras, and the world moved in its own rhythm, chaotic yet purposeful. His grandfather soon joined him, wrapping a shawl over his shoulders. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Everything is alive." "Yes," the old man said, "and every part of life speaks, if you're still enough to listen." They sat on the porch, watching the wind move the world. The old man placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "There will be storms greater than this, not just of wind or rain, but of doubt, of loss, of loneliness. You must not run from them. Sit with them, let them teach you. But how will I know I'm strong enough?" His grandfather pointed to the tallest tree in their yard, its branches bending but never breaking. "Because strength is not in how you resist the wind, but in how you move with it and still remain rooted." The boy inhaled deeply. The night air crisp with wisdom, and in that moment he felt it, the stillness that exists within every storm. The morning arrived with gentle sunlight piercing through the remnants of the storm. Dew clung to the leaves like tiny mirrors, reflecting the quiet teachings of the night. The boy stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the damp earth beneath his feet. The garden, though tousled, stood strong. Nothing had broken, only shifted. The air smelled of renewal. His grandfather was already there, tending to the outer plant. He was inspecting the branches, checking the roots, brushing off fallen leaves with careful hands. "Storms test," he said, without looking up, "but they also cleanse. They shake what no longer serves and reveal what's meant to stay." The boy knelt beside him. "So the wind doesn't come to punish us?" "No," the old man replied. "It comes to awaken us, to remind us that stillness isn't always peace, and that resistance builds strength." He pointed to the plant inside the house, still upright, untouched by the storm. That one was safe, yes, but look closer. Its roots are shallow, its growth confined. Comfort can preserve, but it cannot transform. The boy touched the outside plant's bark, rough, weathered, alive. He realized the difference. One was surviving. The other was truly living. Later that day, they sat beneath the great tree that once began as a fragile sprout. The branches swayed gently, catching the light like a net of gold. The wind whispered through the leaves as if affirming what had been learned. "I used to think protection was the greatest gift," the boy whispered, "but now I see. Exposure is what teaches us how to grow." That afternoon, the grandfather and the boy returned to the porch, resting in silence. The great tree before them stood like a monument, one not built by human hands, but by time, pressure, and grace. The boy traced the wood grain of the chair he sat on, noticing the knots, the imperfections, the lines that told stories only the tree could remember. His grandfather broke the silence. People chase success, like it's a prize hidden behind locked doors. But what if success is simply staying rooted when the winds come? The boy considered this. Then every challenge is an invitation to deepen our roots. The grandfather smiled. Exactly. People fear storms, but they forget. They also bring water. They crack open the earth, letting the rains in, making space for roots to explore where still soil once resisted. In the distance, clouds were gathering again, not dark and ominous, but gentle, rolling like waves. The grandfather pointed to them. Life doesn't give us one storm and stop. It sends waves, again and again, not to destroy, but to prepare. Each wave helps us let go of what we don't need and hold closer to what we do. The boy watched the clouds, no longer with fear, but with curiosity. So if I face what scares me, I become ready for what's next. The grandfather nodded. Yes, fear faced becomes courage, and courage, when rooted in wisdom, becomes your shelter. And there, beneath the open sky, the boy no longer wished for calm. He wished for understanding. As twilight settled, casting amber hues across the land, the boy leaned back, his gaze fixed on the tree that had weathered storms and sunlight alike. "Grandfather," he asked, "why do most people fear discomfort if it helps us grow?" The old man stirred the tea in his cup before answering. "Because pain speaks loudly and growth speaks softly. Most people stop listening when it hurts." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that truth. The grandfather continued, "Comfort feels safe, but it teaches very little. It's the fire, the friction, the pressure. Those are the teachers that shape character. If everything in life were soft and easy, we'd remain as we are, untouched by depth." He motioned toward the garden wall where a vine struggled up a rough surface. That vine, it climbs because of resistance. The wall that seems to hinder it is the very thing giving it purpose and direction. The boy watched the vine, understanding growing inside him like a quiet flame. "So the challenges I face are not here to stop me, but to shape me?" The grandfather smiled. "Exactly. Success is not reaching the top of a mountain. It's who you become on the way up. Each fall, each struggle, each climb, it chisels away what's not essential and reveals your core." As the last rays of sun faded, the boy felt something shift within, a calm resolve that wasn't there before. And with that quiet strength, he began to welcome the climb. That evening, after dinner, the boy wandered alone beneath the stars. The night was silent, yet alive, filled with whispers of the wind, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl. He remembered the tree, the vine, the storms, and suddenly, life didn't seem like a random series of events. It felt like a path, carefully shaped by unseen hands, each twist a lesson, each shadow a teacher. When he returned, his grandfather was placing more wood into the fire. The flames danced upward, casting flickering shadows along the walls. The boy sat beside him, watching the flames consume the logs. "Grandfather," he asked, "what if I try and still fail?" The old man looked at the fire, then at the boy. "Failure is not the opposite of success," he said gently. "It's a part of it. Just as this fire needs wood to burn, your growth needs attempts, missteps, and effort. Without failure, your success would be hollow, like a tree without rings to tell its story." The boy nodded, understanding that success was not a single moment, but a series of moments that include trying, stumbling, and rising again. The grandfather added, "The world teaches us to fear falling, but the wise know each fall is an invitation to rise stronger. Each setback is a pause to gather wisdom, not a sign to quit." The boy looked into the fire and imagined all his fears being burned away, one by one, and as the embers glowed brighter, he felt a deep calm take root. The next morning, the boy woke before sunrise. The world was quiet, as if holding its breath. He stepped outside and saw the great tree once more. It stood still and proud, its branches stretching wide like arms welcoming the sky. He placed a hand on its bark and whispered, "You made it. Through storms, so will I." At breakfast, his grandfather was already waiting, sipping tea with calm eyes. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yes," the boy replied, "but more than that, I feel ready." The grandfather nodded slowly. "Good. Then it's time for your next lesson." They walked together to a nearby stream. The water moved gracefully, weaving around stones and roots without resistance. The grandfather pointed, "Watch how the stream doesn't fight the rocks. It flows around them. It doesn't stop. It adapts. Be like this water." The boy watched closely. So it's not strength that wins. It's persistence and flexibility. "Exactly," his grandfather said. "People believe they must be strong like stone. But water, in time, carves mountains." The boy stood in silence, letting the sound of flowing water soak into his thoughts. He realized then that storms weren't the only teachers. Streams were too. And so were trees, winds, fire, and silence. Everything in nature carried lessons, and every lesson was already inside him, waiting to awaken. The grandfather smiled gently, watching his grandson not just hear, but understand. "Now," he said, "let's return home. The day has many more teachings to reveal." As they walked back home, the morning sun filtered through the trees, casting flickering shadows on the path. The boy noticed how the light danced, never staying in one place too long. "Even sunlight moves," he said softly. His grandfather looked at him. "Yes, and it teaches us something too." The boy raised an eyebrow. "What does it teach?" "That no moment is permanent," the old man said. "Even light passes, even darkness. Everything flows." They arrived at the house, and the grandfather took out an old wooden box. Inside were objects from his past, worn prayer beads, a broken compass, an old letter. He placed them on the table. Every object here holds a lesson I once learned. This compass? He held it up. It stopped working years ago, but it reminds me that direction is not always found outside. Sometimes you must find it within. The boy touched the letter. What about this? That letter, the grandfather said, was written when I failed at something I thought would break me. But it didn't. It helped me become the man I am now. The boy felt the weight of those words. He realized that even in silence, his grandfather had lived many storms, and from each, he carried a quiet treasure. Do you understand now? The grandfather asked. The boy nodded slowly. I do. Storms don't ruin us. They reveal us. And in that moment, between relics of the past and the warmth of morning, the boy took another step toward becoming the man he dreamed to be. That evening, as twilight draped the sky in hues of violet and deep indigo, the boys sat alone under the tree they had once visited. The leaves swayed gently, whispering secrets only the still-hearted could hear. He traced the lines of bark with his fingertips, thinking not just of the tree's growth, but of his own. He remembered how he once believed safety was the path to success, how he thought shelter from hardship was the secret to happiness. But now, sitting beneath a tree born from struggle, he understood the truth. Nothing strong grows in stillness alone. The grandfather soon joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to the boy and sat down beside him without a word. They watched the stars appear one by one, like quiet reminders of presence. You know, the grandfather said, people spend their lives chasing comfort, avoiding discomfort like it's a plague. But comfort doesn't build character. Challenges do. And like this tree, you don't grow wide and strong by hiding. You grow by facing the wind. The boy sipped his tea, its warmth settling in his chest. So the storm, it wasn't against me. The grandfather smiled. No, the storm was for you. Always for you. Silence fell again. But it wasn't empty. It was full, with meaning, with memory, with quiet power. And there, under the endless sky, the boy no longer feared storms. He welcomed them, knowing each one shaped him into something stronger, deeper, and more alive. The days passed slowly, each one like a stone laid carefully on the path of becoming. The boy, now growing into a young man, began to carry himself with quiet confidence. He no longer sought to avoid life's struggles, but to understand them, to walk with them. His eyes reflected something deeper now, a wisdom earned not through books, but through wind, silence, and resilience. One morning he returned alone to the nursery, where the 2 plants had once been chosen. Rows of young saplings stood in the early light, delicate yet full of potential. He walked among them, and each leaf seemed to whisper echoes of his journey. He stopped before a small tree, its roots shallow, its trunk leaning slightly toward the sun. A gardener noticed his gaze. This one, the gardener said, needs to be moved outside. If it stays here, it will never learn to hold its ground. The boy nodded, the message striking something familiar in his chest. Even trees, he said, must face the wind to grow strong. The gardener smiled. Only the ones that wish to touch the sky. He stayed for a moment longer, then walked away, heart full of clarity. Everything his grandfather had shown him, every storm, every silver coin, every whispered teaching, it all pointed to one simple truth. Growth does not happen where it is easy. It happens where it is real. And with that truth planted firmly in his soul, he knew his path would never be the same again. That night, under a sky scattered with silent stars, he sat beneath the same tree that had once been just a sapling. Its roots now ran deep, and its branches reached outward like arms welcoming the world. The air was calm, touched by the scent of earth after rain. He leaned back against the rough bark and let his breath match the rhythm of the wind. Memories rose, like the incense of the boy he once was, of silver coins collected one by one, of laughter that didn't sting but taught. The storms that had once seemed terrifying now felt like old companions. They had not broken him. They had carved space within him to grow. They had whispered truths no comfort could teach. He realized now. The plant in the pot never learned to bend. It never knew the joy of being tested, nor the strength of withstanding pressure. But the tree that braved the open sky, its strength was not a gift, but an earned truth. A truth etched into every knot of wood, every scarred branch. In the hush of that moment, a small child wandered into view, gazing with wonder at the tall tree. The young man knelt and pressed a silver coin into the child's hand. "What is it?" the child asked, eyes wide. "A reminder," he said gently, "that some things grow slowly, silently, and stronger because of it. Just like this tree, just like you will too." And in that soft exchange, a new seed was quietly planted. The morning light broke gently across the horizon, casting long golden rays through the branches of the mighty tree. Birds perched quietly, as if in reverence to something ancient and true. The young man stood beside it, watching the world awaken, not with urgency, but with presence. Life, he had learned, was not a race to outrun storms, but a path to be walked with awareness, one step, one breath at a time. People began to gather beneath the shade. Strangers, villagers, even travelers who had heard whispers of the tree that grew against the wind. They stood not only in awe of its size, but of the peace that surrounded it. Some came seeking answers, others simply for rest, but all left with something invisible, something the tree gave without speaking. A curious traveler approached the young man and asked, "How did this tree grow so strong?" He smiled and looked up. It wasn't shielded, it wasn't hidden. It met the sun, the rain, the thunder. It bent, it shivered, but it stood. Strength comes not from protection, but from the willingness to face what comes. The traveler nodded slowly, the answer sinking into his bones like warmth. From afar, an old man watched, the grandfather, now slower in step, but deeper in sight. His eyes met those of his grandson, and with no words, they exchanged something eternal, the understanding that storms don't destroy the wise. They shape them, and through every storm endured, a soul becomes the shelter it once needed. The sun now rested high above the horizon, casting a warm golden halo over the vast field where the tree stood. Its roots sank deep into the earth, and its branches stretched wide into the sky, as if it had finally become a bridge between what lies above and what lies below. Around it, the silence was not empty. It was full of lessons, of echoes, from storms long past, and of unspoken truths that lingered in the leaves. The young man placed his hand on the trunk. It pulsed with life, but more than that, it pulsed with memory, Every scar in the bark was a lesson. Every ring inside its trunk marked a year of growth, of resistance, of quiet strength. He turned to those gathered. The storms you fear may be the very winds that teach you how to stand, he said softly. And when you stop running from discomfort, you begin to grow roots. The people listened in stillness, their hearts catching the wisdom his voice carried. As the final breeze swept the clearing, the young man closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, grandfather, not just to the man who once taught with plants, but to the presence that lived on in every branch of that tree. Dear listener, may you too become like that tree, firm in storms, generous in shade, and wise in your silence." Breathe in this lesson, let it settle, and if it stirred something within you, share it, live it, and continue the journey inward. The path awaits.